Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of My Nostalgia Tip Games. This time we're going to be taking a look at how I got introduced to the MSX line of computers, which, to be honest, didn't happen until the age of emulation came along, so that would be right around 1996, 97, somewhere around that time. And my first games that I played on the MSX were through emulation. But just one of my friends had an MSX computer. I think it was a Spectra Video SVI 327 or something like that. One of those basic most sold models that we had around here in Finland. And most of the games that were available at the time were cartridges from Konami. So this is going to be turning into Konami Fest today, but hey, that's MSX for you. I eventually got my own MSX, something like maybe 15 years ago, I think. I got it from a flea market for 10 euros, and it's a Canon V-20 model with 64K RAM, if that really matters at this point, because, you know, cartridge games, the amount of RAM doesn't really matter. But yeah, here's the first 5 games for the MSX.
Our first game in the Konami Fest is Antarctic Adventure. It's a game that definitely would have fit the description of a childhood favorite by most kids of the time. The main character is a penguin, so that automatically puts the cuteness factor to 11. And as the title suggests, you are trudging around the Antarctica. There's nothing particularly adventurous about the game though. At least if you compare it to text adventures or the latter-day graphic adventures from LucasArts and Sierra and so on. But in this case, of course, it's not really connected to the game's genre, which is a third-person, behind-viewed, forced movement, platforming collect-em-up. Well, without the actual platforms there. So I don't know what really to call it. A home system arcade game of sorts anyway. While the movement is definitely forced here, you're able to accelerate your penguin's speed of walking to something much closer to running, but you need to develop a sense of how quickly you should be going at certain passages. You have to be jumping over cracks in the ice at all times, and dodge Antarctic sea lions or whatever they are, and collecting flags and fish that jump out from small holes gives you extra points. Of course, you have a time limit within which you must reach the next checkpoint, so it's even more of a race against time, in a pole position kind of way, than just plain forced movement third-person platforming arcade, you know, whatever I just called it before. Like most arcade games though, there's no real ending in this game, and as such offers no bigger reward than the not very announced knowledge that you just beat your previous high score. Antarctic Adventure wasn't my first game that I played once I got introduced to the MSX through emulation, and remains a firm favorite. Happily, the guy who introduced me to the MSX stuff also had an MSX, and I eventually got to see a couple of games on it for real. Hypersports was one of them. If I remember correctly though, he didn't have the first game in the trilogy, but I got to play the latter 2 parts. Also another classic Konami sports game, Track and Field, was in his collection, but I'll talk about that in a later episode. The way I got introduced to Hypersports originally was through the C64 version, which took the first 6 of the original arcade game's 7 events, leaving out Pole Vault, but I never managed to pass the 3rd event for some reason. The MSX trilogy features 11 events combined, 4 in parts 1 and 3, and 3 events in part 2. Part 2 is my favorite, even though it only has 3 events in it: skeet shooting, archery, and weightlifting. The MSX trilogy is missing the first event of the original game, which is swimming, but makes up for it nicely by featuring some more interesting events like springboard diving, trampoline jumping, cycling, and curling. I have to say I'm a big fan of all these joystick waggling type sports games, but I have never been that much of a fan of Hypersports because it progresses as you qualify through each level, and if you don't qualify, it's an instant game over. At least Track and Field and Daley Thompson's first 2 sports games gave you 3 lives to waste. I never particularly enjoyed the C64 version of Hypersports, mostly due to the way the Long Horse event was made. The MSX version's only real problem is that it comes on 3 separate cartridges, so the entire complete in-box set of Hypersports might cost you well up to $100, euros, pounds, whatever, easily. The gameplay is more intuitive on the MSX and as such is more enjoyable on the long run. Highly recommendable. Here's one of the most important top-down racing games of all time, which was officially only ever released on the MSX. F1 Spirit: The Way to Formula 1 was probably the most highly evolved racing game of its time in terms of variety and realism to some extent. Obviously, being a top-down racer, you can't expect it to be a proper simulator, but it's very close to being one. For good reasons, it is praised by practically every MSX user on this planet. For each of the 5 different race types, you have 3 ready-made car designs to choose from, but you can also make your own original design, with selections for engine, body type, brakes, suspensions, and transmission. I know, some gamers will never get over the bad scrolling method that MSX games use, which is pretty much character-based, thus making the scrolling very uncomfortable to look at for more than a few minutes. But if you manage to get over that, F1 Spirit has a lot to give. It already shows some serious room for progression to have a long password system. Also, you get a split-screen 2-player mode and a battle mode, both of which were very rare in racing games of this caliber. Basically, this is the closest 8-bit equivalent we have for Gran Turismo and the likes. It offers a great challenge, but similarly to the more recent equivalents, the challenge is what makes the game so addictive. Even though I never got around to playing F1 Spirit properly until I bought it for myself, it's a game I feel nostalgic about, and which I also feel is necessary for any MSX gamer to have, or any retro gamer who take themselves seriously to at least have played at some point. My first MSX game I ever owned, and for a long time the only one too, Knightmare, is just what the title says. Particularly if you live in PAL area like I do. Even without the additional slowness that PAL systems produce, Knightmare is a slowly progressing, vertically scrolling, forced movement shoot-'em-up which starts slowly enough to make you fall asleep before the first enemy appears, and eventually turns into a bullet hell of sorts. And what I mean by that is that you basically get thrown a few armies of different enemies before the end of the first level that move around shooting in such a way that there's little possibilities of making through it all alive. The problem is, you can't shoot more than 2 or 3 rounds at a time depending on which weapon you're holding, and if you have no idea what you're supposed to do with all the weapon power-ups and other items you eventually pick up, you're bound to have a bad time with this game. So, a manual would help, which I don't have. But luckily, they're available on the internet. I guess the most important thing in Knightmare, like in any other shoot-'em-up, is just get the right weapons and their power-ups and get yourself a shield and as high a running speed as possible. But that's what has always bothered me about this game. There's a small infinity to wait until you can get working on your actual skills in this game, and due to having a PAL system, the infinity becomes even longer. And nowadays I can barely bother to play Knightmare once every other year until I again forget how much of a bother it is to get started with the game. Perhaps exactly because of all that, I have a certain love-hate relationship with Knightmare. It makes you wonder how on earth can a classic MSX adventure like the Maze of Gallius be even related to this. Much less a direct sequel, but there you go. The second MSX game I ever owned was Yie Ar Kung-Fu 2, The Emperor Yi Ga, or however you pronounce it. And I bought it merely for the reason of it being €2 in today's money. I bought it at a flea market where I guess the seller didn't know what it was. Kind of a similar thing actually happened a while ago with 2 games for the Philips CDI, which I don't even have. But the games cost me only €2 combined, so I thought why not? Well anyway, Yie Ar Kung-Fu 2 was never going to be more than a cheap addition to my MSX game collection, which it pretty much remains, but I'm including it here because it's one of the rare MSX games that I actually own. I knew from previous experience, through emulation that is, that this game wasn't something that I would enjoy very much. My earlier experience with an NES version of Yie Ar Kung-Fu was similar enough, and it felt horrible compared to the C64 conversion that was so much closer to the arcade original. The thing is though, both the NES game and this one get less annoying with time, even though, as you can see, the movement that the enemy makes is absolutely random and horrible, and you can't really focus on anything. So, yeah, it's very uncomfortable to play, and I would hazard a guess it's a similar thing with the first game on the MSX as well. For what it's worth though, Yie Ar Kung-Fu 2 was originally developed for the MSX, and it's definitely more of a sequel to the MSX version of the original game than the arcade game. Oddly enough, this sequel was ported for other 8-bit home computers by James Software Limited, which feature power-up items that I've never seen in the MSX version, such as oolong tea and some other sort of cauldron that you pick up, which makes you invincible for a while, I think. Before I bought an SD card reader for the MSX, I used to go through all my MSX cartridge games once a year, which only amounted to maybe 6 or 7 at the time. But now I can't think of any more reasons to get back to this particular game, but it serves as an odd reminder from a certain period of my life.